Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 330. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, we set out with Allah's Apostle on one of his journeys till we reached Al-Bida or Datul Jayish. A necklace of mine was broken, and lost. Allah's Apostle stayed there to search for it, and so did the people along with him. There was no water at that place, so the people went to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and said, "Don't you see what Aisha has done? She has made Allah's Apostle and the people stay where there is no water and they have no water with them." Abu Bakr came while Allah's Apostle was sleeping with his head on my thigh. He said to me, "You have detained Allah's Apostle and the people where there is no water and they have no water with them." So he admonished me and said what Allah wished him to say and hit me on my flank with his hand. Nothing prevented me from moving, because of pain, but the position of Allah's Apostle on my thigh. Allah's Apostle got up when dawn broke and there was no water. So Allah revealed the divine verses of Tayammum. So they all performed Tayammum. Usaid bin Hudayr said, "O the family of Abu Bakr, this is not the first blessing of yours." Then the camel on which I was riding was caused to move from its place and the necklace was found beneath it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 331. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet said, "I have been given 5 things which were not given to anyone else before me. 1. Allah made me victorious by his frightening my enemies, for a distance of 1 month's journey. 2. The earth has been made for me, and for my followers, a place for praying and a thing to perform tayammum, therefore any one of my followers can pray wherever the time of a prayer is due. 3. The booty has been made halal, lawful, for me yet it was not lawful for anyone else before me. 4. I have been given the right of intercession, on the day of resurrection. 5. Every prophet used to be sent to his nation only, but I have been sent to all mankind." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 332. Narrated by Urwa's father, Aisha said, "I borrowed a necklace from Asma and it was lost. So Allah's Apostle sent a man to search for it and he found it. Then the time of the prayer became due and there was no water. They prayed, without ablution, and informed Allah's Apostle about it, so the verse of Tayammum was revealed. Usaid bin Hudayr said to Aisha, "May Allah reward you. By Allah, whenever anything happened which you did not like, Allah brought good for you and for the Muslims in that." Al-Jurf and the time for the Asr prayer became due while he was at Marbadanam, sheepfold, so he performed Tayammum, and prayed there and then entered Medina when the sun was still high, but he did not repeat that prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 333. Narrated by Abu Juhaym al-Ansari, the Prophet came from the direction of Burjamal. A man met him and greeted him. But he did not return back the greeting till he went to a mud wall and smeared his hands and his face with its dust, performed tayammum, and then returned back the greeting. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 334. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin Abza, a man came to Umar bin al-Khattab and said, "I became junub but no water was available." Amr bin Yasir said to Umar, "Do you remember that you and I became junub while both of us were together on a journey and you didn't pray, but I rolled myself on the ground and prayed?" I informed the Prophet about it and he said, "It would have been sufficient for you to do like this." The Prophet then stroked lightly the earth with his hands and then blew off the dust and passed his hands over his face and hands. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 335. Narrated by Said bin Abdurrahman bin Abza, on the authority of his father who said, "Amr said so," the above statement. And Shuba stroked lightly the earth with his hands and brought them close to his mouth, blew off the dust, and passed them over his face and then the backs of his hands. Amr said, ablution, meaning tayammum here, is sufficient for a Muslim if water is not available. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 336. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin Abza, that while he was in the company of Umar, Amr said to Umar, we were in a detachment and became junub and I blew the dust off my hands, performed the rolling over the earth and prayed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 337. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin Abza, Amr said to Umar, I rolled myself in the dust and came to the Prophet who said, passing dusted hands over the face and the backs of the hands is sufficient for you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 338. Narrated by Amr, as above. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 339. Narrated by Amr, the Prophet stroked the earth with his hands and then passed them over his face and the backs of his hands, while demonstrating tayammum. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 340. Narrated by Imran, once we were traveling with the Prophet and we carried on traveling till the last part of the night and then we halted at a place, and slept deeply. There is nothing sweeter than sleep for a traveler in the last part of the night. So it was only the heat of the sun that made us to wake up, and the first to wake up was so and so, then so, and so and then so and so. The narrator Auf said that Abu Raja had told him their names but he had forgotten them, and the fourth person to wake up was Umar bin al-Khattab. And whenever the Prophet used to sleep, nobody would wake up him till he himself used to get up, as we did not know what was happening, being revealed to him in his sleep. So, Umar got up and saw the condition of the people, and he was a strict man, so he said, Allahu Akbar, and raised his voice with takbir, and kept on saying loudly till the Prophet got up because of it. When he got up, the people informed him about what had happened to them. He said, there is no harm, or it will not be harmful. Depart. So they departed from that place, and after covering some distance the Prophet stopped and asked for some water to perform the ablution. So he performed the ablution and the call for the prayer was pronounced and he led the people in prayer. After he finished from the prayer, he saw a man sitting aloof who had not prayed with the people. He asked, "O so and so, what has prevented you from praying with us?" He replied, "I am junub, and there is no water." The Prophet said, "Perform tayammum with clean earth and that is sufficient for you." Then the Prophet proceeded on and the people complained to him of thirst. Thereupon he got down and called a person. The narrator Auf added that Abu Raja had named him but he had forgotten, and Ali, and ordered them to go and bring water. So they went in search of water and met a woman who was sitting on her camel between two bags of water. They asked, "Where can we find water?" She replied, "I was there, at the place of water, this hour yesterday and my people are behind me." They requested her to accompany them. She asked, "Where?" They said, "To Allah's apostle." She said, "Do you mean the man who is called the Sabi, with a new religion?" They replied, "Yes, the same person." "So come along." They brought her to the Prophet and narrated the whole story. He said, "Help her to dismount." The Prophet asked for a pot, then he opened the mouths of the bags and poured some water into the pot. Then he closed the big openings of the bags and opened the small ones, and the people were called upon to drink and water their animals. So they all watered their animals and they, too, all quenched their thirst and also gave water to others, and last of all the Prophet gave a pot full of water to the person who was junub and told him to pour it over his body. The woman was standing and watching all that which they were doing with her water. By Allah, when her water bags were returned, they looked like as if they were more full of water than they had been before. Miracle of Allah's apostle. Then the Prophet ordered us to collect something for her, so dates, flour, and sa'ik were collected, which amounted to a good meal that was put in a piece of cloth. She was helped to ride on her camel, and that cloth full of foodstuff was also placed in front of her, and then the Prophet said to her, "We have not taken your water, but Allah has given water to us." She returned home late. Her relatives asked her, "Oh, so and so, what has delayed you?" She said, "A strange thing. 2 men met me and took me to the man who is called the Sabi, and he did such and such a thing. By Allah, he is either the greatest magician between this and this," gesturing with her index and middle fingers, raising them towards the sky indicating the heaven and the earth, "or he is Allah's true apostle." Afterwards the Muslims used to attack the pagans around her abode but never touched her village. One day she said to her people, "I think that these people leave you purposely. Have you got any inclination to Islam?" They obeyed her and all of them embraced Islam. Abu Abdullah said, "The word Saba'i means the one who has deserted his old religion and embraced a new religion." Abul Aliya said, "The Sabbaths are a sect of people of the scripture who recite the book of Psalms." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 341. Narrated by Abu Wail, Abu Musa said to Abdullah bin Mas'udi, "If one does not find water for ablution, can he give up the prayer?" Abdullah replied, "If you give the permission to perform tayammum, they will perform tayammum even if water was available if one of them found it cold." Abu Musa said, "What about the statement of Amr to Umar?" Abdullah replied, "Umar was not satisfied by his statement." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 342. Narrated by Shaykh bin Salama, "I was with Abdullah and Abu Musa. The latter asked the former, 'O Abu Abdurrahman, what is your opinion if somebody becomes junub and no water is available?' Abdullah replied, 'Do not pray till water is found.' Abu Musa said, 'What do you say about the statement of Amr, who was ordered by the Prophet to perform tayammum?' The Prophet said to him, 'Perform tayammum and that would be sufficient.' Abdullah replied, 'Don't you see that Umar was not satisfied by Amr's statement?' Abu Musa said, 'All right, leave Amr's statement, but what will you say about this verse of tayammum?' Abkayullah kept quiet and then said, 'If we allowed it, then they would probably perform tayammum even if water was available, if one of them found it, water, cold.' The narrator added, 'I said to Shakruk, then did Abdullah dislike to perform tayammum because of this?' He replied, 'Yes.' Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 343. Narrated by Al-Amash, Shaykh said, "While I was sitting with Abdullah and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, the latter asked the former, 'If a person becomes junub and does not find water for 1 month, can he perform tayammum and offer his prayer?' He applied in the negative. Abu Musa said, 'What do you say about this verse from Surat al-Ma'idah, when you do not find water then perform tayammum with clean earth?' Abdullah replied, 'If we allowed it then they would probably perform tayammum with clean earth even if water were available but cold.' I said to Shaykh, 'You then dislike to perform tayammum because of this?' Shaykh said, 'Yes.' Shaykh added, 'Abu Musa said, haven't you heard the statement of Amr to Umar? He said, I was sent out by Allah's apostle for some job and I became junub and could not find water, so I rolled myself over the dust, clean earth, like an animal does, and when I told the Prophet of that he said, like this would have been sufficient.' The Prophet, saying so, lightly stroked the earth with his hand once and blew it off, then passed his left hand over the back of his right hand or his right hand over the back of his left hand and then passed them over his face. So Abdullah said to Abu Musa, "Don't you know that Umar was not satisfied with Amar's statement?" Narrated Shaykh, while I was with Abdullah and Abu Musa, the latter said to the former, "Haven't you heard the statement of Amr to Umar?" He said, "Allah's apostle sent you and me out and I became junub and rolled myself in the dust, clean earth, for tayammum. When we came to Allah's apostle I told him about it and he said, this would have been sufficient, passing his hands over his face and the backs of his hands once only." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 7, Hadith number 344. Narrated by Imran bin Husayn al-Huzai, Allah's apostle saw a person sitting aloof and not praying with the people. He asked him, "O so and so, what prevented you from offering the prayer with the people?" He replied, "O Allah's apostle, I am junub and there is no water." The Prophet said, "Perform tayammum with clean earth and that will be sufficient for you." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 345. Narrated by Abu Dhar, Allah's apostle said, "While I was at Mecca the roof of my house was opened and Gabriel descended, opened my chest, and washed it with Zamzam water. Then he brought a golden tray full of wisdom and faith and having poured its contents into my chest, he closed it. Then he took my hand and ascended with me to the nearest heaven. When I reached the nearest heaven, Gabriel said to the gatekeeper of the heaven, 'Open the gate.' The gatekeeper asked, 'Who is it?' Gabriel answered, 'Gabriel.' He asked, 'Is there anyone with you?' Gabriel replied, 'Yes, Muhammad is with me.' He asked, 'Has he been called?' Gabriel said, 'Yes.' So the gate was opened and we went over the nearest heaven and there we saw a man sitting with some people on his right and some on his left. When he looked towards his right, he laughed and when he looked toward his left he wept. Then he said, 'Welcome, O pious Prophet and pious Son.' I asked Gabriel, 'Who is he?' He replied, 'He is Adam and the people on his right and left are the souls of his offspring. Those on his right are the people of paradise and those on his left are the people of hell and when he looks towards his right he laughs and when he looks towards his left he weeps.' Then he ascended with me till he reached the second heaven and he, Gabriel, said to its gatekeeper, 'Open the gate.' The gatekeeper said to him the same as the gatekeeper of the first heaven had said and he opened the gate. Anas said, Abu Dhar added that the Prophet met Adam, Idris, Moses, Jesus and Abraham. He, Abu Dhar, did not mention on which heaven they were but he mentioned that he, the Prophet, met Adarn on the nearest heaven and Abraham on the sixth heaven. Anas said, when Gabriel along with the Prophet passed by Idris, the latter said, 'Welcome, O pious Prophet and pious brother.' The Prophet asked, 'Who is he?' Gabriel replied, 'He is Idris.' The Prophet added, 'I passed by Moses and he said, "Welcome, O pious Prophet and pious brother." I asked Gabriel, 'Who is he?' Gabriel replied, 'He is Moses.' Then I passed by Jesus and he said, 'Welcome, O pious brother and pious prophet.' I asked, 'Who is he?' Gabriel replied, 'He is Jesus.' Then I passed by Abraham and he said, 'Welcome, O pious prophet and pious son.' I asked Gabriel, 'Who is he?' Gabriel replied, 'He is Abraham.' The Prophet added, then Gabriel ascended with me to a place where I heard the creaking of the pens. Ibn Hazm and Anas bin Malik said, the Prophet said, then Allah enjoined 50 prayers on my followers. When I returned with this order of Allah, I passed by Moses who asked me, what has Allah enjoined on your followers? I replied, he has enjoined 50 prayers on them. Moses said, "Go back to your Lord, and appeal for reduction, for your followers will not be able to bear it." So I went back to Allah and requested for reduction, and he reduced it to half. When I passed by Moses again and informed him about it, he said, "Go back to your Lord as your followers will not be able to bear it." So I returned to Allah and requested for further reduction, and half of it was reduced. I again passed by Moses and he said to me, "Return to your Lord, for your followers will not be able to bear it." So I returned to Allah and he said, "These are 5 prayers and they are all equal to 50. Reward, for my word does not change." I returned to Moses and he told me to go back once again. I replied, "Now I feel shy of asking my Lord again." Then Gabriel took me till we reached Sidrati al-Muntaha, low tree of the utmost boundary, which was shrouded in colors indescribable. Then I was admitted into paradise, where I found small tents or walls made of pearls, and its earth was of musk. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 346. Narrated by Aisha, the mother of believers, Allah enjoined the prayer when he enjoined it. It was 2 rakat only, in every prayer, both when in residence or on journey. Then the prayers offered on journey remain the same, but the rakat of the prayers for non-travelers were increased. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 347. Narrated by Ahmadiyya, we were ordered to bring out our menstruating women and veiled women in the religious gatherings and invocation of Muslims on the 2 Eid festivals. These menstruating women were to keep away from their musalla. A woman asked, "O Allah's Apostle, what about one who does not have a veil?" He said, "Let her share the veil of her companion." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 348. Narrated by Muhammad bin al-Munkadir, once Jabir prayed with his izar tied to his back while his clothes were lying beside him on a wooden peg. Somebody asked him, "Do you offer your prayer in a single izar?" He replied, "I did so to show it to a fool like you. Had any one of us 2 garments in the lifetime of the Prophet?" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 349. Narrated by Muhammad bin al-Munkadir, I saw Jabir bin Abdullah praying in a single garment, and he said that he had seen the Prophet praying in a single garment. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 350. Narrated by Umar bin Abi Salama, the Prophet prayed in one garment and crossed its ends. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 351. Narrated by Umar bin Abi Salama, I saw the Prophet offering prayers in a single garment in the house of Salama, and he had crossed its ends around his shoulders. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 352. Narrated by Umar bin Abi Salama, in the house of Salama I saw Allah's Apostle offering prayers, wrapped in a single garment around his body with its ends crossed round his shoulders. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 353. Narrated by Abu Murrah, the freed slave of Hani, the daughter of Abi Talib said, I went to Allah's Apostle in the year of the conquest of Mecca and found him taking a bath, and his daughter Fatima was screening him. I greeted him. He asked, "Who is she?" I replied, "I am Hani bint Abi Talib." He said, "Welcome, O Hani." When he finished his bath he stood up and prayed 8 rakat while wearing a single garment wrapped round his body, and when he finished I said, "O Allah's Apostle, my brother has told me that he will kill a person whom I gave shelter, and that person is so and so, the son of Habara." The Prophet said, "We shelter the person whom you have sheltered." Ham added, and that was before noon, duha. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 354. Narrated by Abu Huraira, a person asked Allah's Apostle about the offering of the prayer in a single garment. Allah's Apostle replied, "Has every one of you got 2 garments?" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 355. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, "None of you should offer prayer in a single garment that does not cover the shoulders." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 356. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, "Whoever prays in a single garment must cross its ends, over the shoulders." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 357. Narrated by Said bin al-Harith, I asked Jabir bin Abdullah about praying in a single garment. He said, "I traveled with the Prophet during some of his journeys, and I came to him at night for some purpose and I found him praying. At that time, I was wearing a single garment with which I covered my shoulders and prayed by his side. When he finished the prayer, he asked, 'O Jabir, what has brought you here?' I told him what I wanted. When I finished, he asked, 'O Jabir, what is this garment which I have seen and with which you covered your shoulders?' I replied, 'It is a tight garment.' He said, 'If the garment is large enough, wrap it round the body, covering the shoulders, and if it is tight, too short, then use it as an izar, tie it around your waist only.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 358. Narrated by Sahl, the men used to pray with the Prophet with their izars tied around their necks as boys used to do, therefore the Prophet told the women not to raise their heads till the men sat down straight, while praying. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 359. Narrated by Mughira bin Shubi'a, once I was traveling with the Prophet and he said, "O Mughira, take this container of water." I took it and Allah's Apostle went far away till he disappeared. He answered the call of nature and was wearing a Syrian cloak. He tried to take out his hands from its sleeve but it was very tight, so he took out his hands from under it. I poured water and he performed ablution like that for prayers and passed his wet hands over his cuff, leather socks, and then prayed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 360. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, while Allah's Apostle was carrying stones, along with the people of Mecca for the building of the Kaaba wearing an izar, waist sheet cover, his uncle Al-Abbas said to him, "O my nephew, it would be better if you take off your izar and put it over your shoulders underneath the stones." So he took off his izar and put it over his shoulders, but he fell unconscious and since then he had never been seen naked. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 361. Narrated by Abu Huraira, a man stood up and asked the Prophet about praying in a single garment. The Prophet said, "Has every one of you 2 garments?" A man put a similar question to Umar, on which he replied, "When Allah makes you wealthier then you should clothe yourself properly during prayers. Otherwise one can pray with an izar and a rida, a sheet covering upper part of the body. Izar and a shirt, izar and a kaba, trousers and a rida, trousers and a shirt or trousers and a kaba, turban and a kaba or turban and a shirt." The narrator added, "I think that he also said a turban and a rida." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 362. Narrated by Ibn Umar, a person asked Allah's Apostle, "What should a muhrim wear?" He replied, "He should not wear shirts, trousers, a burnous, a hooded cloak, or clothes which are stained with saffron or wars, a kind of perfume. Whoever does not find a sandal to wear can wear cuffs, but these should be cut short so as not to cover the ankles. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 363. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Allah's apostle forbade ishtimal sama, wrapping one's body with a garment so that one cannot raise its end or take one's hand out of it. He also forbade al-atiba, sitting on buttocks with knees close to abdomen and feet apart with the hands circling the knees, while wrapping oneself with a single garment, without having a part of it over the private parts. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 364. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet forbade two kinds of sales, i.e. al-lima and an-nibad. The former is a kind of sale in which the deal is completed if the buyer touches a thing, without seeing or checking it properly, and the latter is a kind of a sale in which the deal is completed when the seller throws a thing towards the buyer giving him no opportunity to see, touch or check it, and, the Prophet forbade, also ishtimal sama and al-atiba in a single garment. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 365. Narrated by Abu Huraira, on the day of Nahr, 10th of Dhul Hijjah, in the year prior to the last Hajj of the Prophet, when Abu Bakr was the leader of the pilgrims in that Hajj, Abu Bakr sent me along with other announcers to Mina to make a public announcement: no pagan is allowed to perform Hajj after this year, and no naked person is allowed to perform the tawaf around the Kaaba. Then Allah's apostle sent all to read out the Surat Bara'ah, at-Tawbah, to the people, so he made the announcement along with us on the day of Nahr in Mina: no pagan is allowed to perform Hajj after this year, and no naked person is allowed to perform the tawaf around the Kaaba. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 366. Narrated by Muhammad bin al-Munkadir, I went to Jabir bin Abdullah and he was praying wrapped in a garment and his rider was lying beside him. When he finished the prayers, I said, "O Abdullah, you pray, in a single garment, while your rider is lying beside you?" He replied, "Yes, I did it intentionally so that the ignorant ones like you might see me." I saw the Prophet praying like this. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 367. Narrated by Abdul Aziz, Anas said, when Allah's apostle invaded Khaybar, we offered the Fajr prayer there yearly in the morning, when it was still dark. The Prophet rode and Abu Talha rode too, and I was riding behind Abu Talha. The Prophet passed through the lane of Khaybar quickly and my knee was touching the thigh of the Prophet. He uncovered his thigh and I saw the whiteness of the thigh of the Prophet. When he entered the town, he said, "Allahu Akbar. Khaybar is ruined." Whenever we approach near a hostile nation to fight, then evil will be the morning of those who have been warned. He repeated this thrice. The people came out for their jobs and some of them said, "Muhammad has come." Some of our companions added, "with his army." We conquered Khaybar, took the captives, and the booty was collected. Dihya came and said, "O Allah's Prophet, give me a slave girl from the captives." The Prophet said, "Go and take any slave girl." He took Safiya bint Huyay. A man came to the Prophet and said, "O Allah's apostles, you gave Safiya bint Huyay to Dihya and she is the chief mistress of the tribes of Qurayza and an-Nadir and she befits none but you." So the Prophet said, "Bring him along with her." So Dihya came with her, and when the Prophet saw her, he said to Dihya, "Take any slave girl other than her from the captives." Anas added, "The Prophet then manumit her and married her." Thabit asked Anas, "O Abu Hamza, what did the Prophet pay her, as mar?" He said, "Herself was her mar, for he manumit her and then married her." Anas added, "While on the way, Sulaim dressed her for marriage ceremony, and at night she sent her as a bride to the Prophet. So the Prophet was a bridegroom, and he said, "Whoever has anything, food, should bring it." He spread out a leather sheet for the food, and some brought dates and others cooking butter. I think he, Anas, mentioned as sadq. So they prepared a dish of hais, a kind of meal. And that was walrama, the marriage banquet, of Allah's Apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 368. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle used to offer the Fajr prayer, and some believing women covered with their veiling sheets used to attend the Fajr prayer with him, and then they would return to their homes unrecognized. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 369. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet prayed in a kamisa, a square garment, having marks. During the prayer, he looked at its marks. So when he finished the prayer he said, "Take this kamisa of mine to Abu Yam and get me his inbijani ya, a woolen garment without marks, as it, the kamisa, has diverted my attention from the prayer." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 370. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet said, "I was looking at its, kamisas, marks during the prayers, and I was afraid that it may put me in trial, by taking away my attention." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 371. Narrated by Anas, Aisha had a kiram, a thin marked woolen curtain, with which he had screened one side of her home. The Prophet said, "Take away this kiram of yours, as its pictures are still displayed in front of me during my prayer, i.e. they divert my attention from the prayer." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 372. Narrated by Uqba bin Amir, the Prophet was given a silken farajah as a present. He wore it while praying. When he had finished his prayer, he took it off violently as if with a strong aversion to it, and said, "It is not the dress of Allah-fearing pious people." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 373. Narrated by Abu Juhayfa, I saw Allah's Apostle in a red leather tent, and I saw Bilal taking the remaining water with which the Prophet had performed ablution. I saw the people taking the utilized water impatiently, and whoever got some of it rubbed it on his body, and those who could not get any took the moisture from the others' hands. Then I saw Bilal carrying an ansa, a spear-headed stick, which he planted in the ground. The Prophet came out tucking up his red cloak, and led the people in prayer and offered 2 rakat, facing the Kaaba, taking ansa as a sutra for his prayer. I saw the people and animals passing in front of him beyond the ansa. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 374. Narrated by Abu Hazim, Sal bin Asaid was asked about the Prophet's pulpit as to what thing it was made of. Sal replied, "None remains alive amongst the people, who knows about it better than I. It was made of tamarisk, wood, of the forest. So and so, the slave of so and so prepared it for Allah's Apostle. When it was constructed and placed in the mosque, Allah's Apostle stood on it facing the Qibla and said Allahu Akbar, and the people stood behind him, and led the people in prayer. He recited and bowed, and the people bowed behind him. Then he raised his head and stepped back, got down, and prostrate on the ground, and then he again ascended the pulpit, recited, bowed, raised his head and stepped back, got down, and prostrate on the ground. So, this is what I know about the pulpit." Ahmad bin Hanbal said, "As the Prophet was at a higher level than the people, there is no harm according to the above-mentioned hadith if the Imam is at a higher level than his followers during the prayers." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 375. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, once Allah's apostle fell off a horse and his leg or shoulder got injured. He swore that he would not go to his wives for 1 month, and he stayed in a mashruba, attic room, having stairs made of date palm trunks. So his companions came to visit him, and he led them in prayer sitting, whereas his companions were standing. When he finished the prayer, he said, "Imam is meant to be followed, so when he says Allahu Akbar, say Allahu Akbar, and when he bows, bow, and when he prostrates, prostrate, and if he prays standing, pray, standing." After the 29th day the Prophet came down from the attic room, and the people asked him, "O Allah's apostle, you swore that you will not go to your wives for 1 month. He said, "The month is 29 days. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 376. Narrated by Abdullah bin Shaddad, Maimuna said, Allah's apostle was praying while I was in my menses, sitting beside him, and sometimes his clothes would touch me during his prostration. Maimuna added, he prayed on a kumra, a small mat sufficient just for the face and the hands while prostrating during prayers. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 377. Narrated by Ishaq, Anas bin Malik said, my grandmother Malaika invited Allah's apostle for a meal which she herself had prepared. He ate from it and said, "Get up. I will lead you in the prayer." Anas added, I took my hasir, washed it with water as it had become dark because of long use, and Allah's apostle stood on it. The orphan, Damarat or Rah, and I aligned behind him, and the old lady, Malaika, stood behind us. Allah's apostle led us in the prayer and offered 2 rakat and then left. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 378. Narrated by Maimuna, Allah's apostle used to pray on kumra. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 379. Narrated by Abu Salama, Aisha the wife of the Prophet said, I used to sleep in front of Allah's apostle and my legs were opposite his qibla, and in prostration he pushed my legs and I withdrew then, and when he stood, I stretched them. Aisha added, in those days the houses were without lights. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 380. Narrated by Aisha, Allah apostle prayed while I was lying like a dead body on his family bed between him and his qibla. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 381. Narrated by Urway, the Prophet prayed while Aisha was lying between him and his qibla on the bed on which they used to sleep. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 382. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we used to pray with the Prophet, and some of us used to place the ends of their clothes at the place of prostration because of scorching heat. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 383. Narrated by Abu Maslama, said bin Yazid al-Azdi, I asked Anas bin Malik whether the Prophet had ever prayed with his shoes on. He replied yes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 384. Narrated by Ibrahim, Hammam bin al-Harith said, I saw Jarir bin Abdullah urinating. Then he performed ablution and passed his wet hands over his cuffs, stood up and prayed. Asked about it? He replied that he had seen the Prophet doing the same. They approved of this narration as Jarir was one of those who embraced Islam very late. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 385l. Narrated by Al-Mughira bin Shubi'a, I helped the Prophet in performing ablution and he passed his wet hands over his cuffs and prayed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 385u. Narrated by Abdullah bin Malik, Ibn Bu'ina, when the Prophet prayed, he used to separate his arms from his body so widely that the whiteness of his armpits was visible. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 386. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's Apostle said, "Whoever prays like us and faces our qibla and eats our slaughtered animals is a Muslim and is under Allah's and His Apostle's protection. So do not betray Allah by betraying those who are in His protection." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 387. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's Apostle said, "I have been ordered to fight the people till they say, 'None has the right to be worshipped but Allah.' And if they say so, pray like our prayers, face our qibla and slaughter as we slaughter, then their blood and property will be sacred to us and we will not interfere with them except legally and their reckoning will be with Allah." Narrated Ma'Iman ibn Siyah that he asked Anas bin Malik, "O Abu Hamza, what makes the life and property of a person sacred?" He replied, "Whoever says, 'None has the right to be worshipped but Allah,' faces our qibla during the prayers, prays like us and eats our slaughtered animal, then he is a Muslim, and has got the same rights and obligations as other Muslims have." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 388. Narrated by Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the Prophet said, "While defecating, neither face nor turn your back to the qibla but face either east or west." Abu Ayyub added, "When we arrived in Sham we came across some lavatories facing the qibla, therefore, we turned ourselves while using them and asked for Allah's forgiveness." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 389. Narrated by Amr bin Mar, I asked Ibn Umar, "Can a person who has performed the tawaf around the Kaaba for Umrah but has not performed the tawaf of Safa and Marwa, have a sexual relation with his wife?" Ibn Umar replied, "When the Prophet reached Mecca he performed the tawaf around the Kaaba, circumambulated it 7 times, and offered a 2-rak'at prayer, at the place, behind the station, of Abraham, and then performed the tawaf, of Safa and Marwa, and verily in Allah's Apostle you have a good example." Then we put the same question to Jabir bin Abdullah and he too replied, "He should not go near his wife, for sexual relation, till he has finished the tawaf of Safa and Marwa." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 390. Narrated by Mujahid, someone came to Ibn Umar and said, "Here is Allah's Apostle entering the Kaaba." Ibn Umar said, "I went there but the Prophet had come out of the Kaaba and I found Bilal standing between its 2 doors. I asked Bilal, 'Did the Prophet pray in the Kaaba?' Bilal replied, 'Yes, he prayed 2 rak'at between the 2 pillars which are to your left on entering the Kaaba. Then Allah's Apostle came out and offered a 2-rak'at prayer facing the Kaaba." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 391. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, when the Prophet entered the Kaaba, he invoked Allah in each and every side of it and did not pray till he came out of it, and offered a 2-rak'at prayer facing the Kaaba and said, "This is the Qibla." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 392. Narrated by Bara bin Azib, Allah's Apostle prayed facing Bayt al-Maqdis for 16 or 17 months but he loved to face the Kaaba, at Mecca, so Allah revealed, "Verily, we have seen the turning of your face to the heaven." 2:144, so the Prophet faced the Kaaba and the fools amongst the people, namely the Jews, said, "What has turned them from their Qibla, Bayt al-Maqdis, which they formerly observed?" Allah revealed, "Say, to Allah belongs the east and the west. He guides whom he will to a straight path." 2:142, a man prayed with the Prophet, facing the Kaaba, and went out. He saw some of the Ansar praying the Asr prayer with their faces towards Baytul Maqdis. He said, I bear witness that I prayed with Allah's apostle facing the Kaaba. So all the people turned their faces towards the Kaaba. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 393. Narrated by Jabir, Allah's apostle used to pray, optional, non-obligatory prayer, while riding on his mount, Rahila, wherever it turned, and whenever he wanted to pray the compulsory prayer he dismounted and prayed facing the Qibla. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 394. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet prayed, and the subnarrator Ibrahim said, I do not know whether he prayed more or less than usual, and when he had finished the prayers he was asked, O Allah's apostle, has there been any change in the prayers? He said, what is it? The people said, you have prayed so much and so much. So the Prophet bent his legs, faced the Qibla and performed 2 prostrations, of Sahu, and finished his prayers with Tas'im, by turning his face to right and left saying, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. When he turned his face to us he said, if there had been anything changed in the prayer, surely I would have informed you, but I am a human being like you and liable to forget like you. So if I forget, remind me, and if any one of you is doubtful about his prayer, he should follow what he thinks to be correct and complete his prayer accordingly and finish it and do 2 prostrations, of Sahu. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 395. Narrated by Umar bin al-Khattab, my Lord agreed with me in 3 things. 1. I said, O Allah's apostle, I wish we took the station of Abraham as our praying place, for some of our prayers. So came the divine inspiration, and take you, people, the station of Abraham as a place of prayer, for some of your prayers, e.g. 2 rakat of Tawaf of Kaaba. 2.125. 2. And as regards the verse of the veiling of the women, I said, O Allah's apostle, I wish you ordered your wives to cover themselves from the men because good and bad ones talk to them. So the verse of the veiling of the women was revealed. 3. Once the wives of the Prophet made a united front against the Prophet, and I said to them, it may be if he, the Prophet, divorced you, all, that his Lord, Allah, will give him instead of you wives better than you. So this verse, the same as I had said, was revealed. 66.5. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 396. Narrated by Anas, as above, 395. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 397. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, while the people were offering the Fajr prayer at Quba, near Medina, someone came to them and said, it has been revealed to Allah's apostle tonight, and he has been ordered to pray facing the Kaaba. So turn your faces to the Kaaba. Those people were facing Sham, Jerusalem, so they turned their faces towards Kaaba, at Mecca. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 398. Narrated by Abdullah, once the Prophet offered 5 rakat in Zuhr prayer. He was asked, is there an increase in the prayer? The Prophet said, and what is it? They said, you have prayed 5 rakat. So he bent his legs and performed 2 prostrations, of Sahu. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 399. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet saw some sputum in the direction of the Qibla, on the wall of the mosque, and he disliked that, and the sign of disgust was apparent from his face. So he got up and scraped it off with his hand and said, whenever any one of you stands for the prayer, he is speaking in private to his Lord, or his Lord is between him and his Qibla. So, none of you should spit in the direction of the Qibla, but one can spit to the left or under his foot. The Prophet then took the corner of his sheet and spat in it and folded it and said, or you can do like this. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 400. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's apostle saw sputum on the wall of the mosque in the direction of the Qibla and scraped it off. He faced the people and said, whenever any one of you is praying, he should not spit in front of him, because in the prayer Allah is in front of him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 401. Narrated by Aisha, the mother of faithful believers, Allah's apostle saw some nasal secretions, expectoration, or sputum on the wall of the mosque in the direction of the Qibla and scraped it off. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 402. Narrated by Abd Hurairah and Abu said, Allah's apostle saw some expectoration on the wall of the mosque. He took gravel and scraped it off and said, if any one of you wanted to spit, he should neither spit in front of him nor on his right, but he could spit either on his left or under his left foot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 403. Narrated by Abd Hurairah and Abu Sa'id, Allah's apostle saw some expectoration on the wall of the mosque. He took gravel and scraped it off and said, if any one of you wanted to spit, he should neither spit in front of him nor on his right, but could spit either on his left or under his left foot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 404. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, none of you should spit in front or on his right, but he could spit either on his left or under his foot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 405. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said, a faithful believer while in prayer is speaking in private to his Lord, so he should neither spit in front of him nor to his right side, but he could spit either on his left or under his foot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 406. Narrated by Abu said, the Prophet saw sputum on the wall of the mosque in the direction of the Qibla and scraped it off with gravel. Then he forbade spitting in front or on the right, but allowed it on one's left or under one's left foot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 407. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said, spitting in the mosque is a sin and its expiation is to bury it. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 408. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Prophet said, if any one of you stands for prayer, he should not spit in front of him, because in prayer he is speaking in private to Allah, and he should not spit on his right as there is an angel, but he can spit either on his left or under his left foot and bury it, i.e. expectoration. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 409. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet saw expectoration on the wall of the mosque in the direction of the Qibla and scraped it off with his hand. It seemed that he disliked it, and the sign of disgust was apparent from his face. He said, if any one of you stands for the prayer, he is speaking in private to his Lord, or his Lord is between him and his Qibla, therefore he should not spit towards his Qibla, but he could spit either on his left or under his foot. Then he took the corner of his sheet and spat in it, folded it, and said, or do like this. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 410. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's apostle said, do you consider or see that my face is towards the Qibla? By Allah, neither your submissiveness nor your bowing is hidden from me, surely I see you from my back. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 411. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet led us in a prayer and then got up on the pulpit and said, in your prayer and bowing, I certainly see you from my back as I see you, while looking at you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 412. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's apostle ordered for a horse race. The trained horses were to run from a place called Al-Hafiyah to Thaniyat al-Wada, and the horses which were not trained were to run from Al-Thaniyah to the Masjid, Mosque of Bani Zurayk. The sub-narrator added, Ibn Umar was one of those who took part in the race. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 413. Narrated by Anas, some goods came to Allah's apostle from Bahrain. The Prophet ordered the people to spread them in the mosque. It was the biggest amount of goods Allah's apostle had. Hadith collection www.hadithcollection.com ever received. He left for prayer and did not even look at it. After finishing the prayer, he sat by those goods and gave from those to everybody he saw. Al-Abbas came to him and said, O Allah's apostle, give me something too, because I gave ransom for myself and Akil. Allah's apostle told him to take. So he stuffed his garment with it and tried to carry it away, but he failed to do so. He said, O Allah's apostle, order someone to help me in lifting it. The Prophet refused. He then said to the Prophet, will you please help me to lift it? Allah's apostle refused. Then Al-Abbas threw some of it and tried to lift it, but failed. He again said, O Allah's apostle, order someone to help me to lift it. He refused. Al-Abbas then said to the Prophet, will you please help me to lift it? He again refused. Then Al-Abbas threw some of it, and lifted it on his shoulders and went away. Allah's apostle kept on watching him till he disappeared from his sight and was astonished at his greediness. Allah's apostle did not get up till the last coin was distributed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 414. Narrated by Anas, I found the Prophet in the mosque along with some people. He said to me, did Abu Talha send you? I said, yes. He said, for a meal? I said, yes. Then he said to his companions, get up. They set out and I was ahead of them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 415. Narrated by Sal bin Said, a man said, O Allah's apostle, if a man finds another man with his wife, committing adultery, should the husband kill him? Later on I saw them, the man and his wife, doing li'an in the mosque. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 416. Narrated by Itban bin Malik, the Prophet came to my house and said, where do you like me to pray? I pointed to a place. The Prophet then said, Allahu Akbar, and we aligned behind him and he offered a 2-rak'at prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 417. Narrated by Itban bin Malik, who was one of the companions of Allah's apostle and one of the Ansars who took part in the battle of Badr, I came to Allah's apostle and said, O Allah's apostle, I have weak eyesight and I led my people in prayers. When it rains the water flows in the valley between me and my people, so I cannot go to their mosque to lead them in prayer. O Allah's apostle, I wish you would come to my house and pray in it so that I could take that place as a musalla. Allah's apostle said, Allah willing, I will do so. Next day after the sun rose high, Allah's apostle and Abu Bakr came and Allah's apostle asked for permission to enter. I gave him permission and he did not sit on entering the house but said to me, where do you like me to pray? I pointed to a place in my house. So Allah's apostle stood there and said, Allahu Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com Akbar, and we all got up and aligned behind him and offered a 2-rak'at prayer and ended it with taslim. we requested him to stay for a meal called hazura which we had prepared for him. Many members of our family gathered in the house and one of them said, "Where is Malik bin al-Duki Aishin or Ibn al-Dukshan?" One of them replied, "He is a hypocrite and does not love Allah and his apostle." Hearing that, Allah's apostle said, "Do not say so. Haven't you seen that he said, 'None has the right to be worshipped but Allah for Allah's sake only'?" He said, "Allah and his apostle know better. We have seen him helping and advising hypocrites." Allah's apostle said, "Allah has forbidden the hell fire for those who say, 'None has the right to be worshipped but Allah for Allah's sake only.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 418. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet used to start everything from the right, for good things, whenever it was possible in all his affairs, for example, in washing, combing or wearing shoes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 419. Narrated by Aisha, Habiba and Salama mentioned about a church they had seen in Ethiopia in which there were pictures. They told the Prophet about it, on which he said, "If any religious man dies amongst those people they would build a place of worship at his grave and make these pictures in it. They will be the worst creature in the sight of Allah on the day of resurrection." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 420. Narrated by Anas, when the Prophet arrived Medina he dismounted at Awali Medina amongst a tribe called Banu Amr bin Auf. He stayed there for 14 nights. Then he sent for Bani an-Najjar and they came armed with their swords. As if I am looking, just now, as the Prophet was sitting over his rahila, mount, with Abu Bakr riding behind him and all Banu an-Najjar around him till he dismounted at the courtyard of Abu Ayyub's house. The Prophet loved to pray wherever the time for the prayer was due, even at sheepfolds. Later on he ordered that a mosque should be built and sent for some people of Banu an-Najjar and said, "O Banu an-Najjar, suggest to me the price of this walled piece of land of yours." They replied, "No. By Allah, we do not demand its price except from Allah." Anas added, "There were graves of pagans in it and some of it was unleveled and there were some date palm trees in it. The Prophet ordered that the graves of the pagans be dug out and the unleveled land be level-led and the date palm trees be cut down. So all that was done. They aligned these cut date palm trees towards the Qibla of the mosque, as a wall, and they also built 2 stone side walls, of the mosque. His companions brought the stones while reciting some poetic verses. The Prophet Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com was with them and he kept on saying, "There is no goodness except that of the hereafter, O Allah. So please forgive the Ansars and the emigrants." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 421. Narrated by Abu al-Tayyiah, Anas said, "The Prophet prayed in the sheepfold. Later on I heard him saying, he prayed in the sheepfolds before the construction of the mosque." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 422. Narrated by Nafi, I saw Ibn Umar praying while taking his camel as a sutra in front of him and he said, "I saw the Prophet doing the same." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 423. Narrated by Abdullah bin Abbas, the sun eclipsed and Allah's apostle offered the eclipse prayer and said, "I have been shown the hell fire, now, and I never saw a worse and horrible sight than the sight I have seen today." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 424. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet had said, "Offer some of your prayers, nawafil, at home, and do not take your houses as graves." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 425. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's apostle said, "Do not enter the places of these people where Allah's punishment had fallen unless you do so weeping. If you do not weep, do not enter the places of these people, because Allah's curse and punishment which fell upon them may fall upon you." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 426. Narrated by Aisha, Salama told Allah's apostle about a church which she had seen in Ethiopia and which was called Maria. She told him about the pictures which she had seen in it. Allah's apostle said, "If any righteous pious man dies amongst them, they would build a place of worship at his grave and make these pictures in it. They are the worst creatures in the sight of Allah." Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 427. Narrated by Aisha and Abdullah bin Abbas, when the last moment of the life of Allah's apostle came, he started putting his kamisa on his face, and when he felt hot and short of breath he took it off his face and said, "May Allah curse the Jews and Christians, for they built the places of worship at the graves of their prophets." The Prophet was warning Muslims of what those had done. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 428. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, "May Allah's curse be on the Jews, for they built the places of worship at the graves of their prophets." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 429. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's apostle said, "I have been given 5 things which were not given to any amongst the prophets before me. These are: 1. Allah made me victorious by his frightening my enemies, for a distance of 1 month's journey. 2. The earth has been made for me, and for my followers, a place for praying and a thing to perform tayammum. Therefore my followers can pray wherever the time of a prayer is due. 3. The booty has been made halal, lawful, for me, and was not made so for anyone else. 4. Every prophet used to be sent to his nation exclusively, but I have been sent one o all mankind. 5. I have been given the right of intercession, on the day of resurrection." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 430. Narrated by Aisha, there was a black slave girl belonging to an Arab tribe, and they manumit her, but she remained with them. The slave girl said, "Once one of their girls, of that tribe, came out wearing a red leather scarf decorated with precious stones. It fell from her, or she placed it somewhere. A kite passed by that place, saw it lying there, and mistaking it for a piece of meat, flew away with it. Those people searched for it, but they did not find it. So they accused me of stealing it and started searching me, and even searched my private parts." The slave girl further said, "By Allah, while I was standing, in that state, with those people, the same kite passed by them and dropped the red scarf, and it fell amongst them. I told them, 'This is what you accused me of, and I was innocent, and now this is it.'" Aisha added, "That slave girl came to Allah's apostle and embraced Islam. She had a tent or a small room with a low roof in Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. The mosque. Whenever she called on me, she had a talk with me, and whenever she sat with me, she would recite the following: the day of the scarf band was one of the wonders of our Lord, verily he rescued me from the disbelievers' town." Aisha added, "Once I asked her, 'What is the matter with you? Whenever you sit with me, you always recite these poetic verses.' On that she told me the whole story." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 431. Narrated by Nafa, Abdullah bin Umar said, "I used to sleep in the mosque of the Prophet while I was young and unmarried." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 432. Narrated by Sal bin Said, Allah's apostle went to Fatima's house but did not find Ali there. So he asked, "Where is your cousin?" She replied, "There was something between us and he got angry with me and went out. He did not sleep, midday nap, in the house." Allah's apostle asked a person to look for him. That person came and said, "O Allah's apostle, he, Ali, is sleeping in the mosque." Allah's apostle went there and Ali was lying. His upper body cover had fallen down to one side of his body and he was covered with dust. Allah's apostle started cleaning the dust from him saying, "Get up. O Abaturub. Get up." O Abaturub, literally means, "O father of dust." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 433. Narrated by Abu Huraira, I saw 70 of as-Sufa men and none of them had a rida, a garment covering the upper part of the body. They had either izars, only, or sheets which they tied round their necks. Some of these sheets reached the middle of their legs and some reached their heels, and they used to gather them with their hands lest their private parts should become naked. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 434. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, I went to the Prophet in the mosque. The sub-narrator Mas'ar thought that Jabir had said, "in the forenoon." He ordered me to pray 2 rakat. He owed me some money and he repaid it to me and gave more than what was due to me. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 435. Narrated by Abu Qatada al-Islami, Allah's apostle said, "If any one of you enters a mosque, he should pray 2 rakat before sitting." Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 436. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, "The angels keep on asking Allah's forgiveness for any one of you, as long as he is at his musalla, praying place, and he does not pass wind, Hadith. They say, O Allah, forgive him, O Allah, be merciful to him." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 437. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, in the lifetime of Allah's apostle the mosque was built of adobes, its roof of the leaves of date palms and its pillars of the stems of date palms. Abu Bakr did not alter it. Umar expanded it on the same pattern as it was in the lifetime of Allah's apostle by using adobes, leaves of date palms, and changing the pillars into wooden ones. Uthman changed it by expanding it to a great extent and built its walls with engraved stones and lime and made its pillars of engraved stones and its roof of teak wood. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 438. Narrated by Ikrimah, Ibn Abbas said to me and to his son Ali, "Go to Abu Sa'id and listen to what he narrates." So we went and found him in a garden looking after it. He picked up his rida, wore it and sat down and started narrating till the topic of the construction of the mosque reached. He said, "We were carrying 1 adobe at a time while Amr was carrying 2. The Prophet saw him and started removing the dust from his body and said, 'May Allah be merciful to Amr. He will be inviting them, i.e. his murderers, the rebellious group, to paradise, and they will invite him to hell-fire.' Amr said, 'I seek refuge with Allah from affliction.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 439. Narrated by Saul, Allah's apostle sent someone to a woman telling her to order her slave, carpenter, to prepare a wooden pulpit for him to sit on. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 440. Narrated by Jabir, a woman said, "O Allah's apostle, shall I get something constructed for you to sit on, as I have a slave who is a carpenter?" He replied, "Yes, if you like." So she had that pulpit constructed. Hadith collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 441. Narrated by Abdullah al-Qalani, I heard Uthman bin Affan saying, when people argued too much about his intention to reconstruct the mosque of Allah's Apostle, you have talked too much. I heard the Prophet saying, whoever built a mosque, Bukir thought that Asim, another subnarrator, added, intending Allah's pleasure, Allah would build for him a similar place in paradise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 442. Narrated by Amr, I heard Jabir bin Abdullah saying, a man passed through the mosque carrying arrows. Allah's Apostle said to him, hold them by their heads. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 443. Narrated by Abu Burda bin Abdullah, on the authority of his father, the Prophet said, whoever passes through our mosques or markets with arrows should hold them by their heads lest he should injure a Muslim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 444. Narrated by Hassan bin Thabit al-Ansari, I asked Abu Hurairah by Allah, tell me the truth whether you heard the Prophet saying, O Hassan. Reply on behalf of Allah's Apostle. O Allah, help him with the Holy Spirit. Abu Hurairah said, yes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 445. Narrated by Aisha, once I saw Allah's Apostle at the door of my house while some Ethiopians were playing in the mosque, displaying their skill with spears. Allah's Apostle was screening me with his rida so as to enable me to see their display. Urway said that Aisha said, I saw the Prophet and the Ethiopians were playing with their spears. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 446. Narrated by Aisha, Barara came to seek my help regarding her manumission. I told herself you like I would pay your price to your masters but your al-wala, one, would be for me. Her masters said, if you like, you can pay what remains, of the price of her manumission, Sufyan the sub-narrator once said, or if you like you can manumit her, but her inheritance, al-wala would be for us. When Allah's Apostle came, I spoke to him about it. He said, buy her and manumit her. Hadith collection www.hadithcollection.com. No doubt al-wala, one, is for the manumit. Then Allah's Apostle stood on the pulpit, or Allah's Apostle ascended the pulpit as Sufyan once said, and said, what about some people who impose conditions which are not present in Allah's book, laws? Whoever imposes conditions which are not in Allah's book, laws, his conditions will be invalid even if he imposed them 100 times. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 447. Narrated by Kabi, in the mosque El asked Ibn Abi Hadrid to pay the debts which he owed to me and our voices grew louder. Allah's Apostle heard that while he was in his house. So he came to us raising the curtain of his room and said, O Kabi. I replied, Labaik, O Allah's Apostle. He said, O Kabi, reduce your debt to 1/2, gesturing with his hand. I said, O Allah's Apostle. I have done so. Then Allah's Apostle said, to Ibn Abi Hadrid, get up and pay the debt to him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 448. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, a black man or a black woman used to sweep the mosque and he or she died. The Prophet asked about her, or him. He was told that she, or he, had died. He said, why did you not inform me? Show me his grave, or her grave. So he went to her, his grave and offered her his funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 449. Narrated by Aisha, when the verses of Surat al-Baqarah about the usury riba were revealed, the Prophet went to the mosque and recited them in front of the people and then banned the trade of alcohol. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 450a. Narrated by Abu Rafi, Abu Hurairah said, a man or a woman used to clean the mosque. A sub-narrator said, most probably a woman. Then he narrated the hadith of the Prophet where it is mentioned that he offered her funeral prayer at her grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 450b. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, last night a big demon, Afrit, from the jinns came to me and wanted to interrupt my prayers, or said something similar, but Allah enabled me to overpower him. I wanted to fasten him to one of the pillars of the mosque so that all of you could see him in the morning, but I remembered the statement of my brother Solomon, as stated in Quran, my Lord, forgive me and bestow on me a kingdom such as shall not belong to Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Anybody after me, 38.35. The sub-narrator Ra said, he, the demon, was dismissed humiliated. The prayer with Taslim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 451. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, the Prophet sent some horsemen to Najd and they brought a man called Thumama bin Uthal from Bani Hanifa. They fastened him to one of the pillars of the mosque. The Prophet came and ordered them to release him. He went to a garden of date palms near the mosque, took a bath and entered the mosque again and said, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and Muhammad is his apostle, i.e. he embraced Islam. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 452. Narrated by Aisha, on the day of Al-Khandak, Battle of the Trench, the medial arm vein of Usayd bin Mu'ad was injured and the Prophet pitched a tent in the mosque to look after him. There was another tent for Banu Ghaffar in the mosque and the blood started flowing from Usayd's tent to the tent of Bani Ghaffar. They shouted, O occupants of the tent! What is coming from you to us? They found that Usayd's wound was bleeding profusely and Usayd died in his tent. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 453. Narrated by Salama, I complained to Allah's Apostle that I was sick. He told me to perform the tawaf behind the people while riding. So I did so and Allah's Apostle was praying beside the Kaaba and reciting the surah starting with Wa Turwa Kitabun Master. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 454. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, two of the companions of the Prophet departed from him on a dark night and were led by two lights like lamps, going in front of them from Allah as a miracle, lighting the way in front of them, and when they parted, each of them was accompanied by one of these lights till he reached their respective houses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 455. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the Prophet delivered a sermon and said, Allah gave a choice to one of his slaves either to choose this world or what is with him in the hereafter. He chose the latter. Abu Bakr wept. I said low myself, why is this sheikh weeping, if Allah gave choice to one of his slaves either to choose this world or what is with him in the hereafter and he chose the latter. And that slave was Allah's Apostle himself. Abu Bakr knew more than us. The Prophet said, O Abu Bakr, don't weep. The Prophet added, Abu Bakr has favored me. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Much with his property and company. If I were to take a Khalil from mankind, I would certainly have taken Abu Bakr, but the Islamic brotherhood and friendship is sufficient. Close all the gates in the mosque except that of Abu Bakr. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 456. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, Allah's apostle in his fatal illness came out with a piece of cloth tied round his head and sat on the pulpit. After thanking and praising Allah, he said, "There is no one who had done more favor to me with life and property than Abu Bakr bin Abi Quhafa. If I were to take a Khalil, I would certainly have taken Abu Bakr, but the Islamic brotherhood is superior. Close all the small doors in this mosque except that of Abu Bakr." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 457. Narrated by Nafi, Ibn Umar said, "The Prophet arrived at Mecca and sent for Uthman bin Talha. He opened the gate of the Kaaba and the Prophet, Bilal, Usama bin Zayd and Uthman bin Talha entered the Kaaba, and then they closed its door, from inside. They stayed there for an hour, and then came out. Ibn Umar added, I quickly went to Bilal and asked him, whether the Prophet had prayed. Bilal replied, he prayed in it. I asked, where? He replied, between the two pillars. Ibn Umar added, I forgot to ask how many rakat he, the Prophet, had prayed in the Kaaba. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 458. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle sent some horsemen to Najd, and they brought a man called Thumama bin Uthal from Bani Hanifa. They fastened him to one of the pillars of the mosque. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 459. Narrated by Al-Sa'ib bin Yazid, I was standing in the mosque and somebody threw a gravel at me. I looked and found that he was Umar bin al-Khattab. He said to me, fetch those two men to me. When I did, he said to them, who are you? Or, where do you come from? They replied, we are from Taif. Umar said, were you from this city, Medina, I would have punished you for raising your voices in the mosque of Allah's apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 460. Narrated by Ka'b bin Malik, during the lifetime of Allah's apostle I asked Ibn Abi Hadrid in the mosque to pay the debts which he owed to me, and our voices grew so loud that Allah's apostle Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com heard them while he was in his house. So he came to us after raising the curtain of his room. The Prophet said, O Ka'b bin Malik. I replied, Labbaik, O Allah's apostle. He gestured with his hand to me to reduce the debt to 1/2. I said, O Allah's apostle, have done it. Allah's apostle said, to Ibn Hadrid, get up and pay it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 461. Narrated by Nafi, Ibn Umar said, while the Prophet was on the pulpit, a man asked him how to offer the night prayers. He replied, pray 2 rakat at a time, and then 2 and then 2 and so on, and if you are afraid of the dawn, the approach of the time of the Fajr prayer, pray 1 rak'ah, and that will be the witr for all the rakat which you have offered. Ibn Umar said, the last rakat of the night prayer should be odd, for the Prophet ordered it to be so. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 462. Narrated by Ibn Umar, a man came to the Prophet while he was delivering the sermon and asked him how to offer the night prayers. The Prophet replied, pray 2 rakat at a time, and then 2 and then 2 and so on, and if you are afraid of dawn, the approach of the time of the Fajr prayer, pray 1 rak'ah, and that will be the width for all the rakat which you have prayed. Narrated Ubaydullah bin Abdullah bin Umar, a man called the Prophet while he was in the mosque. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 463. Narrated by Abu Waqid al-Laythi, while Allah's apostle was sitting in the mosque, with some people, 3 men came, 2 of them came in front of Allah's apostle and the third one went away, and then one of them found a place in the circle and sat there while the second man sat behind the gathering, and the third one went away. When Allah's apostle finished his preaching, he said, "Shall I tell you about these 3 persons?" One of them betook himself to Allah and so Allah accepted him and accommodated him, the second felt shy before Allah so Allah did the same for him and sheltered him in his mercy, and did not punish him, while the third turned his face from Allah, and went away, so Allah turned his face from him likewise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 464. Narrated by Abad bin Taymim, that his uncle said, "I saw Allah's apostle lying flat, on his back, in the mosque with one leg on the other." Narrated said bin al-Musayyib that Umar and Uthman used to do the same. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 465. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, "I had seen my parents following Islam since I attained the age of puberty. Not a day passed but the Prophet visited us, both in the mornings and evenings. My father Abi Bakr thought of building a mosque in the courtyard of his house and he did so. He used to pray and recite the Quran in it. The pagan women and their children used to stand by him and look at him with surprise. Abu Bakr was a soft-hearted person and could not help weeping while reciting the Quran. The chiefs of the Quraysh pagans became afraid of that, i.e. that their children and women might be affected by the recitation of Quran. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 466. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, "The prayer offered in congregation is 25 times more superior, in reward, to the prayer offered alone in one's house or in a business center, because if one performs ablution and does it perfectly, and then proceeds to the mosque with the sole intention of praying, then for each step which he takes towards the mosque, Allah upgrades him a degree in reward and forgives, crosses out one sin till he enters the mosque. When he enters the mosque he is considered in prayer as long as he is waiting for the prayer and the angels keep on asking for Allah's forgiveness for him and they keep on saying, 'O Allah, be merciful to him, O Allah. Forgive him,' as long as he keeps on sitting at his praying place and does not pass wind." See Hadith number 620. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 467. Narrated by Ibn Umar or Ibn Amr, the Prophet clasped his hands, by interlacing his fingers. Narrated Abdullah that Allah's apostle said, "O Abdullah bin Amr, what will be your condition when you will be left with the sentiments of worst people? They will be in conflict with each other." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 468. Narrated by Abu Musa, the Prophet said, "A faithful believer to a faithful believer is like the bricks of a wall, enforcing each other." While saying that, the Prophet clasped his hands, by interlacing his fingers. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 469. Narrated by Ibn Sirin, Abu Huraira said, "Allah's apostle led us in one of the 2 Isha prayers. Abu Huraira named that prayer but I forgot it. Abu Huraira added, he prayed 2 rakat and then finished the prayer with taslim. He stood up near a piece of wood lying across the Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Mosque and leaned on it in such a way as if he was angry. Then he put his right hand over the left and clasped his hands by interlacing his fingers and then put his right cheek on the back of his left hand. The people who were in haste left the mosque through its gates. They wondered whether the prayer was reduced. And amongst them were Abu Bakr and Umar, but they hesitated to ask the Prophet. A long-handed man called Dulyadin asked the Prophet, "O Allah's apostle, have you forgotten, or has the prayer been reduced?" The Prophet replied, "I have neither forgotten nor has the prayer been reduced." The Prophet added, "Is what Dulyadin has said true?" They, the people, said, "Yes, it is true." The Prophet stood up again and led the prayer, completing the remaining prayer, forgotten by him, and performed Talisrim, and then said, "Allahu Akbar." And then he did a prostration as he used to prostrate, or longer than that. He then raised his head saying, "Allahu Akbar." He then again said, "Allahu Akbar," and prostrate as he used to prostrate, or longer than that. Then he raised his head and said, "Allahu Akbar." The subnarrator added, "I think that they asked, Ibn Sirin, whether the Prophet completed the prayer with taslim." He replied, "I heard that Imran bin Husayn had said, then he, the Prophet, did taslim." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 470. Narrated by Fudail bin Sulaiman, Musa bin Uqba said, "I saw Salim bin Abdullah looking for some places on the way and prayed there." He narrated that his father used to pray there, and had seen the Prophet praying at those very places. Narrated Nafi on the authority of Ibn Umar, who said, "I used to pray at those places." Musa the narrator added, "I asked Salim, on which he said, I agree with Nafi concerning those places, except the mosque situated at the place called Shuruf ar-Raha." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 8, Hadith number 471. Narrated by unknown. Hadith is about the various places on the way from Medina to Mecca where the Prophet prayed, and they're in locations impossible to translate.